what is it, 5:09? This is welcome to the Human Services Committee meeting. The date is Monday, November 7th, 2022, and we will proceed with the meeting. Believe we have a quorum. Do we have anybody online, or is everybody here in person? Anybody online? Is Reed online? Okay. But we do have a quorum, so we'll move forward with our business, starting off with approval of minutes of the regular meeting from September 6th. If I can have a motion to approve those minutes.
I move to approve minutes.
Recording in progress.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Hedekadis and seconded by Councilmember Ravel. Any changes, discussion? Do they look good?
I won't be voting. I wasn't on the council yet, so
Okay.
I abstain.
Perfect. Okay, I think we're ready to call the roll call. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Heracarius?
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns, sorry.
Aye.
And Councilmember
Harris.
Harris. I know you.
I know, we went to school together. I will be abstaining.
All right, and the minutes are approved. So we're moving along to presentations. We have a presentation from the Arts Council, and it's to accept and place on file. So we have Toby Sachs. Good to see you, Toby.
Thank you very much. Great to see everybody. This is my third time reporting to the Human Services Committee on what the Arts Council's been up to, but it will be my last reporting. I'm handing over the chair to Melissa Molitor just now this month, and the vice chair to Krista Fabian de Castro. But thank you very much for the time and the opportunity to tell you what we've been up to. First of all, who we are. There are 12 of us. We're a mix of visual theatre, music artists, gallerists, fundists, consultants. 6 of the group identify as BIPOC, 6 of them identify as women. And what I'll briefly take you through today, and really I'll take only 5 minutes, is some re-articulation of our vision that we've been through as a process this year, the progress we've made on building our budget, how we use that money in our grants, and finally to invite you to our party. Our purpose, vision and values is something that we spent some considerable time articulating this year. Our purpose is that we nourish and build an inclusive community where creative expression thrives and the arts flourish. We empower and amplify artists and arts organizations as community builders and change makers. And we support diverse forms of expression and provide equitable access to the arts. And that builds to a vision where we see the arts as central to an equitable, sustainable city where authentic and diverse creative voices are accessible to all, where artists are supported, thrive, and are recognized as fundamental to a healthy and engaged society. The values those are built on are that we maintain that art is for everyone, it should be a catalyst for inclusivity and equity. We support decolonization of the arts and all forms of creative expression. We value the voices of artists to enrich lives and move society forward, and we believe that the arts are a vital reflection of our humanity. And as you know, we have a wonderfully thriving and flourishing arts sector in the city, just a very few of the wonderful events that have gone on this year, all of which, of course, and many more that we've supported with our grant making. Can't do it without money, and our budget last year was $50,000, and I was given some stern advice by this group that it would be very good if we could bring in some more money to augment city funds. And I'm pleased to say we've had some success with that. We built the budget very much with the staff's help, of course, to almost $300,000. And the components there are a grant from the Everton Community Foundation, from the Good Neighbour Racial Equity Fund, a significant amount of ARP funds, not out of the 42 million, but through the National Endowment of the Arts, flows down through that. A new grant that we've never had before from the NEA, 2 grants rather than 1 from the Illinois Arts Council, and very importantly, your contribution. And within that, 21,000 flows back to the city to fund some of the staff support that we receive and appreciate. So we've had some success there, and we very much will aim to keep up those efforts. How have we spent it? Well, we've really reimagined our grant programs throughout the pandemic. We overhauled the Cultural Fund Grant, our annual grant, to reflect the issues of the pandemic, but very importantly, a heightened focus on racial equity, taking the lead from the council and the dais here, and with input from our equity working group. To make the grants more inclusive, we've now offered those grants to community arts groups and individual artists, as well as 501c3s. We've streamlined the process of applying. And probably the most important single thing is that we've firmly announced that applications from BIPOC organisations and programmes serving underserved communities will be favoured. The judging panels are predominantly BIPOC, and we've doubled the grant pool from 30,000, over doubled from 30,000 to 70,000. Of that money, over 80% in the last 2 years went to organisations of colour or programmes serving underserved communities. And very importantly, over 25% of it went to first-time applicants. We're very keen to be broadening the pool of the people we serve, as well as continuing to support the people that we've known for longer. We've added new grant programs because we've had extra money. Our Community Resiliency Through the Arts program is funded from that Racial Equity Fund, and fuels partnerships between social service organisations and the arts. We gave it this year to Kurt's Cafe, the Centre for Independent Futures, Connections for the Homeless, YOU, and Evanston Latinos, and each of those has a $10,000 artist residency forwarding their mission, but through art. And we're in conversation with Dave Davis about hoping to make that an ongoing program. And our ARP money, as I say, flowing down through the National Endowment for the Arts, puts $135,000 into general operating dollars to help the arts organisations recover, and $15,000 towards our city staff costs. There were only 3 communities in Illinois who got this grant, Chicago, Rockford, and ourselves. So with the lead that we get from the city and all the things that are going on here, we can make a pretty strong case for why we use our money well. We've got big plans for next year. We have a public art commission for South Fountain Square to celebrate the Black history of Evanston and honour the Black experience. We've got $100,000 of that money secured so far, and we've applied for another $100,000 matching funds in the Our Town programme from the NEA. If we get that money, we'll be able to fund a year of enrichment programming as well as the ongoing permanent art work. And the decision from the NEA will come in April, so I'd ask you to keep your fingers crossed with us for that. The most important thing I have to say, and the reason really I come back every year, is this last one, that it's the city's financial support that is absolutely vital to us gaining these grants that we now actively pursue from other places. Many of them are straightforwardly matching grants, so every dollar that you put in from the general fund is matched 4 times over by further matching grants. But even money like the NEA ARPA money, I don't think we would have got had we not been able to demonstrate that we have strong civic support for the programs that we're running. So lastly, I said I'd be brief. Thank you so much for your continued support. It's greatly appreciated. And please come to our party, our annual event, A Bright Night for the Arts. Only 4,000 of our total nearly 300,000 budget goes to anything other than grants, and a little bit of it goes to our one party a year. Bright Night for the Arts at Studio 5 next to Dance Centre Evanston on Dempster Plaza. It'll be on Saturday the 19th of November. We'll be presenting the Mayor's Awards for the Arts, which the winners were announced today. We'll have an arts showcase. We'll have live performances of both song and dance. And it's fun, it's free, and everyone is very welcome, particularly this group. So that's as much as I'll take you through. In the packet, there are some more details of most of the organisations and individuals that we've granted to. But that's as much of your time as I want to take up today. I'd be delighted to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Toby. Let's open it up for any questions or comments. Councilmember Harris.
have buttons to push and levers to switch. So thank you so much for your presentation. As a parent of a child that was completely an athlete, and then a parent of a child who had no athletic ability and found her passion for acting and the arts, I appreciate that we have other alternatives for our community and our youth to participate in. So I greatly appreciate the arts. Thank you for the invitation to the party, and just so you know, November 19th seems to be a very busy day because that is the NAACP event as well. So what time is that event?
Absolutely. So we're kicking off at 6. The Mayor's Awards will follow shortly after, and then he will hot-foot it to the
Yes.
NAACP.
All right, well, good luck with your event, and again, thank you so much. I appreciated seeing the diversity and just the other opportunities. Everybody can't be an athlete, so thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ravel.
Well, thank you, Toby, for sharing this great news with us and the really impressive grants that you've received. To what do you attribute that success at grantsmanship?
We weren't writing grants until this year, so we put considerable effort into that. We work with the staff. We tend to take on the narrative part. The staff that do a great deal of sort of the administrative piece of it, and we've had a strong story to tell. Had we not been living that purpose that you see at the front there, I don't think we would have done nearly as well with the competitive grants. It's just my view.
Yeah, right. Well, it's really very exciting, so congratulations.
Councilmember Reed.
I just want to add my voice to the excitement. Well, I was not expecting quite the jump, so really kudos to you and the full Arts Council and the staff who staff the Arts Council. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's it, Toby. Thank you so much.
Thanks so
Appreciate
much.
your time.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a public comment, and everybody will have 2 minutes, starting with Bonnie Wilson.
Thank you for letting me speak tonight. I am Bonnie Wilson. I live in the First Ward, and I've been a real estate agent in Evanston for 38 years, so I understand the need for affordable housing in Evanston. I also live across the street from Raymond Park. I have seen people sleeping in the park during the summer months. I have had homeless people sleeping in the foyer of our building, plus incidents of using our parking lot as a bathroom. I feel very strongly that the clients of Connections should have their place to live. A place they could call home would be so much better for them and the community, so they can have a bed to sleep in, food to eat, and their own bathroom. I happened to see the rooms at the Margarita Inn many years ago when it was rehabbed as a hotel. I have not seen the rooms again, but I did take a tour recently, and I'm sure that not much has changed in those apartments. I remember the rooms being very nice and very comfortable. I understand that some other neighbors of the Margarita Inn are concerned about the shelter's impact on the neighborhood. Having worked with Connections and joining forces for affordable housing for many years, I believe that they do a great job running their operations. While I'm not sure a license is actually necessary, the license proposed tonight seems to be a strong one that will hold Connections accountable without imposing restrictions that would make them less effective. I believe that the proposed licensing language to Ordinance 65-022, modifying Title 8, Chapter 17, Shelters for the Temporary Homeless, is a good solution to ensure the health, safety, and well-being of residents and staff of such facilities as the Margarita Inn. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Paul Freefeld, I believe. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Freifeld.
I didn't
Thank you.
realize I'd only have 2 minutes, so I'll have to kind of edit on the fly. This has to do with an incident that I was involved in with an Evanston police officer. So I'm going to try to edit this. There was, you have the information, in my case, I believe, in your packet, And there were two issues that I wanted to address because I think we have to evolve into policies and procedures for the police. The first one was this particular officer either lied or made a mistake to the court in seeking an order of protection against me in a dispute in the neighborhood. He essentially told the court that I lied in wait in my home, looked out the window, saw him, and rushed out to confront him. I think that was a lie. He told the investigation that it was a mistake, that he assumed that that was the case. And my question is, are we going to allow police officers, trained police officers, to, even if you're charitable and say that that was an assumption, to put that in a court record without any consequences? It obviously would have influenced a judge. And again, he eventually admitted that he made an assumption, the police investigation, although essentially defending the officer, backed up the idea that it was a physical impossibility for me to see. So that is the first question I have regarding policies. Are we going to allow the, oh, is that it?
That does not mean you have to stop, no. Keep going.
Oh,
My phone
okay.
hit the.
All right. And the second policy that I'd like to see the police and the folks that oversee them was Commander Glue during the Police Review Committee said that the reason that this particular police officer was in the alley is he was investigating a crime on several incidences. Well, the crime he claims to be investigating was one that he was a victim of. So I guess I want to finish by saying, do we truly want to give sworn officers of the law an out when they either lie or, being charitable, assume and put into an official court document a significant bit of totally wrong information so inflammatory that it's bound to put somebody's spotless record with a blemish? And finally, why do we want police officers to be allowed to investigate the cases they're claiming to be victims in? And if you believe this incident is a minor thing, I can certainly accept that. But my point has been, if the police are allowed to cut corners...
And if you could wrap your comments up.
To cut corners and provide untruths in these minor occurrences, can we be sure that they're not doing it in more substantial cases? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Next up, we have John Cleve.
And I'd like to, at the end, pass out a document, just use my 2 minutes and then hand a document to all of you and to Betty, to you, and,
Sure.
and not Jonathan, to you as well. Thank you so much for letting me speak. I'm talking about HS2. I was here in July. We had a conversation, I think, the last time that Human Services met. I've looked at this, the proposed revisions to the ordinance. There's some major flaws in it, and the reason that I'm bringing these flaws up is because Jonathan himself said, this is an unprecedented social experiment, and we have to do this right? And so part of doing this right is to set the stage where the city can ensure that everything is running in a way that's beneficial to the city, to the residences, and to the businesses and neighbors in the downtown. And there's a lot of weaknesses in the way that the proposed revisions were spelled out. A couple of them that I'll bring up is it expressly allows alcohol consumption on the premises. A substantial number of homeless have substance abuse issues. This is condoning it, and it seems to me that it's an anathema to trying to get them in a position of stability where they can live permanently in a place. It doesn't spell out any requirements for the operator to provide mental health and substance abuse services. And I know that Connections plans to do it, but if there's any retraction, if the ARPA money runs out and there's a reduction in donations that they're receiving, this doesn't require them to maintain an appropriate ratio of mental health and substance abuse counseling to service the population that they have in there. There's not a word about that. It asks the applicants to submit guidelines for admission, linkage to social services, procedures for handling misconduct, and so on, but it doesn't say they have to follow them. There's no language in there that actually, all they have to do is submit it as part of the application, and then it's done. There's no provision in there to ensure that they're following through the very guidelines that they submitted and it was approved. There's no limits on length of stay. And ultimately, we realize that 10 months is a target. It may go longer than that, but if you have somebody there for 2 or 3 years, you're denying somebody on the wait list a chance to try to get in there and better their lives. I don't understand why you wouldn't have, say, a 12-month or 14-month ceiling on the thing just to make it fair for the residents who wish to be inside of it. The reporting requirement is basically non-existent. It's very vague in there. It doesn't spell out things like the percent of Evanston residents, even though it had said at the beginning of it that you're supposed to do a preference for that. It doesn't have things like the success ratio of percent of placement in evictions, average length of stay, and other data. And Betty and I met a few weeks ago, spoken about this, and I was very clear to her that that's something that the neighbors want to see. We want to, and Bobby, when you and I spoke on the phone, we wanted to see that.
Yeah, and I'm taking notes too. If you can wrap up your
All right,
your
yeah.
comments
So
just
what
we
I'm,
can
I,
allow
and
them to have-
I was informed by Jonathan tonight that you guys are delaying the vote on that, which is great. I do believe I'm going to hand this out, and I think that there should be some serious changes to what was written in order to make sure that the city has the safeguards that they need in order to do what's right.
Sure. Thanks, John. Next up, we have Larry Starkman.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, and I hope to be the briefest.
Sorry. I apologize.
That's okay, the briefest speaker. I'm very concerned about several things, most notably the failure to address the issue of real estate taxes. For those of you who don't know, Niles Township received their notices of increase last week, and single-family homes went up something like an average of 40%. And I think in Evanston, we can look forward to the same thing. I have been told that Connections does not want to pay real estate taxes. And that, to me, is a non-starter. I did some quick math based on what I understand that Connections is paying for the Margarita, and based on the assessor's level of assessment of 25%, the equalization factor of 3.2, and assuming a 9% tax rate, that quantifies to $576,000 in real estate taxes that will not be paid. And I think in Evanston, we have an inordinate amount of institutions that don't pay real estate taxes, and we can't afford any more. And I don't know why this is supposed to be a good neighbor agreement. I don't know why this isn't one of the first things. I mean, basically, they're saying that they shouldn't have to pay real estate taxes, but everybody else does. It's not fair. I also, lastly, I don't see, and I've never seen, and nobody I know has seen, any kind of an economic impact agreement. That should be right up there on top. We'd like to see a report from a third-party entity setting forth that there are no substantial negative impact economically to the neighborhood and to the city. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Don Dirks is up next.
Thanks very much for taking the time to listen to me. As I live next to John Cleve, a lot of our concerns are the same, but there are a few things that I'd like to point out. One is, in the ordinance that we went through, they've removed any kind of condition for a register of residents at the, or occupants at the facility, and I think that needs to be established and reestablished in the ordinance. That's, by eliminating the requirement, it pretty much lays the groundwork to become a safe haven for anyone wishing to hide from authorities for whatever reasons. That, in cooperation, in addition to the need to have full cooperation with public safety officers, ought to be spelled out, articulated in the ordinance. You don't want to, they hold up, there's a condition that the Homeless Bill of Rights says they can refuse to identify people there. That can go a little bit too far. The permanent residence, the ordinance states it's not to provide a permanent residence, but fails to define what permanent is. what term what term makes that permanent? To me, over a year seems to be pretty permanent. If that, then in fact, if people stay there for a year, 2 years, and so forth, does that change the legal status of the shelter? We'd like to see an absolute ban on weapons, an articulated ban on weapons being there, and also regular inspections to ensure that no weapons are being kept on premises. And an impact study, to assess and document impacts to the neighborhood and businesses affected by any kind of large-scale homeless shelter. To suggest there are no or negligible impacts is fairly naive. And that's it for me. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Next up, I think this is Susan Calder. Is it Susan? Okay. Or Sue-Ann, I'm sorry. Is it Sue-Ann or Susan? I'm sorry. Suzanne, there we go.
Suzanne Calder, and I am a Fourth Ward resident. I live about 2.5 blocks from the Margarita Inn. I frequently walk on Oak Street and down Grove Street, probably almost on a daily basis. I would first of all like to congratulate the city and its staff for developing this license ordinance. It sets out clear guidance for the health and safety of those living in non-congregate shelter, temporary shelter. It gives guidance to the operators, present ones, and hopefully future operators that support our vulnerable population. And it's important to do it right. In response to an email 2 days ago with a subject line, "Bad press on Margarita Inn," I went through my emails, and there were 21 of them in response to this initial email. They were negative, positive, and some offered some solutions to some of the problems. But you have to look at the overall picture, and it was great that these people took the time to tell us about the issues that the city and Connections needs to address. So, 10 years ago, a mayor's task force on homelessness reported to the council and their document was called Heading Home. It was overwhelmingly adopted by the council, and 2 of the items that the council and the city were to address was an increase in the number of supportive housing units, and this certainly, Margarita Inn is certainly one of those. It also, the Margarita Inn is a blueprint for the national standard of Housing First model. And the Housing First model was called for in that report as well, and it requires that people should have a stable roof over their heads, a key to their door, and food security.
Your 2 minutes is up. If you could
Okay.
bring them to a close.
The simple fact is that we need the Margarita as a city's approach to our homeless problem. It may not be a perfect solution to some, but I think we are lucky to have it, and it is an excellent place to start. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Eric. What's the last name?
It's Passett.
Passett. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Eric Passett.
So, hi, my name is Eric Passett, and I'm an owner of North Shore Apartments and Condos, and I'm also a resident of the Fourth Ward. Now, I've been here before speaking up against this ordinance, and let's forget about the fact that we believe that Connections for the Homeless are bad actors. You know, they should not be the ones running this. I mean, just a few months ago, they had bunk beds on the first floor, which is clearly against, I mean, if I was doing that as a landlord, you would shut me down. You'd put a do not enter. Yet they're still able to operate just like anybody else. One of their residents punched a cop. Yet they're still able to, again, we'd be shut down for exactly the same thing. You know, so I guess if we take them out of the picture, you know, if you put in Albany Care is now, I'm sure everybody's heard, they're now able to lift the amount of residents they have in there. I think they're down to 232. They can go up to 400. We don't even know what the effect that's going to have on our community. We have no idea. They're allowed to have, not everybody has background checks. There's a lot of people in there that probably shouldn't be in that community, in our community. So we have no idea. Plus, we have a police staff that is well understaffed. And now we're going to put another, how many people in? And we don't have inspections on normal buildings every year because we don't have the staff to do it. How are we going to inspect this building, the Margarita Inn, who are clearly bad actors on a regular basis? Won't be able to. And how are we going to have the teeth, if they are violating it, to enforce it? Once this is put in place, we could have more than just Margarita Inn. We can have other ones. This just opens the door wide open to all this stuff. I mean, it's economic development. This is the exact opposite of that. So enough said.
Thank you for your comments. Rich Eddington. Here he is. Good to see you, Chief.
Good to see you all this evening, and thank you for the courtesy of this opportunity. I made a commitment to several individuals that I would come by and speak from my perspective on the proposed changes for the Margarita Inn. And my comments will be broken into two sets. First of all, the conduct and mindset of Connections for the Homeless. First of all, I think that they have a very difficult time in enforcing rules and maintaining order. That's not in their wheelhouse. They're very good at the charitable work they do. That's very important. But maintaining order in a downtown facility isn't their strong suit. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're spending a considerable amount of time on this. And we compare and contrast that to other locations, we seem to have more difficulty. I think, too, that their conduct to date, their reliance on the Bill of Rights for the Homeless Act, they're using as a shield to prevent them from enforcing any type of code of conduct or standards of conduct for their clientele in the downtown area. I think this is counterproductive to the City of Evanston's goals. First of all, the City of Evanston is a financial supporter of the Northlight Inn. You can't expect people to drop $200 for theater tickets, be subjected to a gauntlet of panhandlers, and come back ever again. You get one chance to make a good impression. I don't think this is going to help. I think, too, we need to look at the cost of this deal, and once again, kind of outside the city's purview, but something that I would hope you as decision makers would consider. I, as a contributor to Connections for the Homeless's through charity events like Taste of Evanston, I am perplexed that we would want to spend money on brick and mortar instead of services. We can replicate the same number of units for substantially less cost elsewhere and turn that money into direct services. Lastly, I want to touch on the current state of your police department. First of all, you have an excellent chief. I'm thrilled that she's here, but she's still short a considerable number of people. You already have several locations of high needs populations. Albany Care, Greenwood Care, the Rice Center, and the Methadone Clinic. I don't know that your police department can sustain another high needs location. Thank you all for your time and attention. It was very nice to see you again.
Thanks, Chief. Aaron Brown. Is there Aaron Brown, either in person or online? No Aaron Brown. Okay, who else do we have? Christine Kramer. Christine Kramer, in person, online. Can you hear me? Okay. And I think that is all. Is there anyone else that would like to make a public comment?
Hi, good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nafret Halim. I'm not an Evanston resident. I work in Evanston, and I am most familiar and did the majority of my work as a younger person in the 8th Ward, and with time have gotten to know the dynamics and specifics of the different wards. We own and operate the building next to Connections. Next to the Margarita Inn. I did briefly read the proposed language, and I would like to bring up 2 points. The first point that I have a problem with is the fact that this ordinance specifically calls for people who have an existing relationship with the city. I don't think that's appropriate. We started our business as immigrants. We had no relationships, and we managed to grow a big business through meritocracy and hard work. And I think it's unacceptable to have it be a requirement in legislation that you work with an entity that has an established relationship. I personally find that super offensive and contrary to best practices. The second thing I would like to say is just concerning my business. As you may know, I'm in the work of apartment building management. We manage a number of units. There are certain professions that are very, very deeply regulated. One of them we all know is the medical field. The business field in real estate is exceptionally regulated. We are audited all the time. I have to go to continuing education for my license. I'm licensed through the state as a broker. Everyone who works in my domain is expected to try to stay in compliance. We follow laws, we have attorneys, we spend a lot of money studying to make sure that we do things correctly. I do not understand the relationship with the people who are in the building and the owner of the building. When we have a person living in our building, we have a lease agreement with them. They are our tenant and we are our landlord. We are their landlord. When we have an issue with them, it comes through our contractual relationship. I don't understand how there can be 3 strikes and you're out. What does that mean? What does it mean to be out? If I, as a landlord, want to evict somebody, I go through the courts. I have to file a paper. I go to the sheriff. I go to the judge. There is procedure for me to follow. I just don't put people on the street. I don't understand anything about how that works. I did read a statement from Connections that and it could be wrong, that something about 15% of the population who enters into their program, I'm not going to use the correct terminology, but I guess does not graduate to the next level, that they fail, right? That they somehow don't get placed in permanent housing and end up back in the streets. So what does that mean to that 15%? Are they back in the streets unsupervised? If this was a tenant, there would be a host of information that is part of a legal agreement that we as a business owner are responsible for. And Connections is getting paid for people in this building. It is a very noble endeavor, but it's a business endeavor. It's a business endeavor, and they get paid for it.
Wrap up your comments.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Aaron Brown is trying to make a comment online and did not receive the link. So I sent a quick email to our city manager to see if he can send him the link. So if he joins us at some point, we'll allow him some time to make a public comment. Would you like to as well? Yeah. Yeah, this is going to be the last one. And this is going to be the last one. What's your name so I can write it down?
Try to make it good.
No, you good.
Kirsten Dorelio.
And the
Thank you
last
very
name, I'm
much.
sorry.
Dorelio. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm standing here today solidly in support of Connections for the Homeless in my ward, in the 4th Ward. I am a 4th Ward resident and homeowner, and I stand in solidarity with the staff of Connections, which I think is incredible and top-notch talent that we are very fortunate to have in this city. I also stand in solidarity with some of the more unfortunate residents of our community who make up part of the fabric of our society. I'm very chagrined to hear the lack of compassion in this room tonight, because it's not what I think that our city is made of. It's not what we aspire to. It's not what was in the resolution that was passed by City Council in 2019 to be an anti-racist city, because of course, part of what we're talking about or not talking about today is this is a issue that has to do with racial equity. And we can tell that by the numbers and the percentages of people who are being served by Connections. Last year, over 86%, I believe, somewhere near the 99% mark, were people of color who need to be taken care of in this town and who need to be rescued in terms of our social services net. I feel that I, along with other people of privilege who are sitting in this room right now and are trying to protect property over people and who are trying to protect tax revenues over having some human compassion. This is not the Evanston I know. This is not the Evanston we can be. This is not the Evanston we aspire to. I know that my council member, Nusma, has done incredible amounts of research. He has found precedents in neighboring cities like Oak Park, and we have been able to look at models like Rockford, where the mayor wanted to eliminate homelessness. It's my personal opinion that any homelessness that we have in the city of Evanston is too much homelessness. And I'm putting my trust in the research that I know my council member, who I elected, has already done. I support the research that he has done to know that this can be successful, and I expect that he is representing me in this way. I'm very hopeful and optimistic that you commissioners will make this a reality. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move forward. Thank you for public comment. We are going to move forward to items for consideration. Can someone move HS1, please?
I move HS1, 2023 Human Services Committee meeting dates.
All right, it's been properly moved by Councilman Reed. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Harris. Did everybody review the dates? You good? Councilmember Ravel.
Yeah, well, I just had one question about the July date. What is the city holiday going to be for the July 4th weekend? Because this schedule has us meeting
He's
on
checking.
Monday, July 3rd.
Director Ogbo is checking. We will stand at ease for a moment, or sit at ease.
Good day, members of the Human Services Committee. Just looking at the July 2023 calendar, that Monday, which is the 3rd, I believe, should be the meeting. There's a holiday on July 1st, which actually falls on a Saturday, so I believe it should be correct, given that the meeting falls on the 3rd. Is that was what's stated in the memo, I believe?
Okay, so, and then we'd have a holiday on the next day, on the 4th.
On the 4th, yes.
All right, any other questions, comments? All right, seeing none, we will call the roll then.
You can do an all.
We just do it. I guess you're here now. All those in favor of the 2023 Human Service Committee meeting dates indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All right, the ayes have it. HS2, can someone move HS2, please?
I move ordinance 65-0-22, modifying Title 8, Chapter 17, shelters for the temporarily homeless.
All right, it's been properly moved by Councilmember Ravel, seconded by Councilmember Hedekadis. And I think ultimately we've been asked to table this, but because we have everyone here, I think it makes sense to still discuss it. Who wants to start us off with questions, comments? Councilmember Nusma is here. I know he wants to address the committee.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks to our legal department and Director Ogbo for doing the work on this ordinance. What we've said all along is we want to take our time and make sure we're doing this right. Part of doing that right is making sure it fits in the right bureaucratic structure, and I guess that's why we're holding it tonight at staff's request. I'm not sure if Council Cummings is going to weigh in to explain that. But that gives us some more time to focus on the details, and I would like to talk about those details a little bit. We don't have a template here. We are figuring this out in the absence of looking at another community that's doing exactly what we're doing. So we're doing it our way. We're doing it uniquely. We know that the kind of operation that we need Margarita Inn to be is successful in other communities, and I'm looking at Oak Park here. If they can do it in Oak Park, we can do it here. In full context, this license ordinance is one of 3 legs of kind of regulatory oversight that we're putting in place here. The other 2 legs are the zoning process and the special use process. Connections for the Homeless has submitted their special use application. That's going to the Land Use Committee on November 30th. And the third leg of the oversight is a good neighbor agreement. And so I'd like to thank all of the neighborhood stakeholders who have taken their time to contribute to developing an agreement that I hope will establish mutual expectations between Connections and the neighbors, and also establish some lines of communication. The regulatory oversight really belongs in this license agreement. And so I would like to speak to some of those details which some of the neighbors have brought to you this evening. I want to talk about the alcohol policy, and this is something that I've struggled with. I completely understand the argument for allowing alcohol in the building. That argument is if people are going to be drinking, it's better to have them drink in the building than on the street. However, if we look at Oak Park as our example of a community in which this is really working without much community consternation, in Oak Park, my understanding is they have a no alcohol in the building policy. I would like that to be considered here in Evanston. If we're looking for ways to do this right, and we're looking at the one community that has something so similar that, you know, we'd be kind of silly not to look very closely at how they're doing it, I would like to have a no alcohol policy considered. So that is maybe something that this committee could discuss tonight. The other details that Mr. Cleve and Mr. Durkee's mentioned, I think we have time to maybe follow up on some of those and beef up the ordinance in that regard. I'd like to close out by saying that what we're doing here at the Margarita Inn and what Connections is doing in the Margarita Inn is complementary to other work that we need to be doing at the city. It doesn't replace it. It's not the same thing. It's related, but we at the city have to do a better job addressing quality of life issues, addressing public safety issues downtown, addressing issues with the unhoused homeless, addressing issues with panhandling, both allowable panhandling and aggressive panhandling. We need to do more to make Evanston a welcoming environment for visitors, a welcoming place to do business for business owners that are here and business owners that are coming. We do have a lot more to do, and we are working on that. Councilmember Burns, you and I, Councilmember Kelly have a meeting on Friday to talk about ways we can really kind of ramp up our response to some of these social issues downtown. And I want to make sure the community understands that we're not shirking that responsibility. We acknowledge that problem. It is a serious problem that we do need to fix, and it's on us as city officials to fix that. That work is very important. It's very necessary, Margarita Inn or no Margarita Inn. And I would stipulate that Margarita Inn is actually part of the solution and can be complementary to that work that we also have to do in other areas. So that's all I have for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from committee members? Councilmember Ravel.
Well, I appreciate Councilmember Newsom's mentioning of the alcohol policy because as currently drafted, it would change the policy for Hilda's Place, which does not allow alcohol. And then there's also the question of smoking because I think this allows smoking in throughout the building, and that would do the same for Hilda's Place. And I think at Hilda's Place, smoking is restricted just to designated areas. So I do think that the alcohol piece for sure needs to be addressed. And I guess the question is dealing with the Margarita Inn as a temporary homeless shelter the best title for that? Because I thought the idea was that it was going to be considered a rooming house of some sort. So I don't know, maybe that's going to get clarified for us when this comes back to us.
I would ask Council Cummings if he could speak to that. Councilmember Newsom, I don't know if you can speak to that, the distinction between the two.
I'll add what context I can. I'm not a lawyer and certainly not a land use attorney. So take I brought the wrong notes. But specifically to Councilmember Ravel's point, the way this was drafted fit into the existing ordinance for temporary overnight shelters. It makes more sense, given the land use's previous ruling, that the Margarita Inn, as proposed, should be considered as a rooming house. It makes sense for the language to appear not in the temporary overnight shelter section, but in the rooming house section of City Code, which I believe is Title 5, Chapter something, rather than Title 8. So that is, I think, when this comes back to this committee next month or at your next meeting, it will be essentially the same text with, if we do decide to make changes to the details, but in a different section of code, so it aligns with the Land Use Commission's previous determination. I hope that explains everything, and I hope it was accurate.
Yeah, and so that would clarify, that would leave the Hilda's Place
So
rules
Hilda's
and
Place
regulations
would still
as-
be,
right,
would still be
as they
regulated.
are, yeah.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. I appreciate the public comment on both sides of this issue, and I certainly appreciate Councilmember Newsma and all that he's done to make this work here in Evanston, in his ward. And that certainly takes leadership, and it takes courage to stand up and to try to do this right and not just shut it down. I do have some concern about the proposal to essentially bar alcohol from the building, and I think it comes from a place that aligns with what the community wants. I'm trying to hear your concerns, and I think about the folks who are near Albany Care, and I remember hearing from Councilmember Newsom complaints about folks from neighbors in his community about who've said that folks are going out in the park across the street and smoking cigarettes, and that's maybe what a park is used for. People occupy the park, but it is somewhat concerning for some folks. And now I think I've read recently that Albany Care is adding a second floor deck or something where folks can go out on the deck and remain in the building and or in the building but outside and smoke cigarettes, as not to spill over into the park across the street. And so I wonder here, would we rather folks consume alcohol in the privacy of their own room, or would we rather folks feel like they need to go outside and stand out on the street or wherever they'd go and consume alcohol there, because they don't want to risk their housing? And so I certainly, as I consider that, I hear Councilmember Newsma, and I do trust the research of what a park has done, but I'd certainly want to hear more from Connections, from other experts, folks who deal with addiction directly, and wonder if that's just the best approach to achieve the ultimate goal, which is to have that behavior not become a nuisance to other folks, right? If folks are dealing with addiction, we want to help them, but we want to try to mitigate the nuisance of their addiction to anyone else. And so I just want to move with caution on that one bit of policy, but otherwise I'm supportive of the measure as is.
And I guess just to follow up on that, I would like to see the research, because I'm not sure that Oak Park even put that in place because of any research. They could have done it for a number of reasons. And so I think at the next meeting, I just would like to see the research. To me, it makes sense if you had that coupled with like a zero substance use policy, then it will make sense. It's like no one, that no participants, shall be under the influence of any, illegal substance, and therefore, right, consuming alcohol on the premises is prohibited. That would make sense to me. But without that, I think I'd lean more towards, I think what Councilman Reed is saying, that they will continue to drink, they just won't drink on the premises, and so then where would they drink? Is kind of where I'm at on that. I have some questions, but before I continue, I want to see if there are any other questions or comments. You good? You got one? Oh, yeah, light is, I'm sorry, my computer was blocking it. Councilmember Harris, you have the floor. Sorry about that.
Again, I have buttons and levers. It's all good. So yes, I do think we have to move cautiously, not expeditiously, and make sure that we are protecting all aspects of our city and our town and our people. As someone stated in the back, we want to make sure we're not in the business of doing the wrong thing. We want to do the right thing. So I want us to move accurately. Being new to the council, the emails that I have now started to receive from both sides, it's not overwhelming, but it's interesting to see all the perspectives. Having a degree in human services and substance abuse counseling, I do find it troubling for the drinking on site and not having, for sure, wraparound services, and making sure that we're working with the addictive process, not just saying we don't want people to drink in the streets, that we're working on the core issues. So for me, the greatest concern is having wraparound services, making sure that we have the social services, as Councilmember Newsom said earlier, that help the residents. We're not just housing them. We really need to work on helping mind, body, and soul. So that is of sheer importance to me, and doing it accurately, if we are to do it, is most prudent.
Just to continue along with that, and I don't know if Connections is here and prepared to speak to respond to questions, but following along on that topic about mental health and substance use, programs within the Connections. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I think there was a question of staff ratio to participants and that not being a part of the license, but can you speak a little bit about, because I think what was suggested is that some of that programming is not currently happening. I think what was said is that Connections is working on it, but it's not in place yet. My understanding is that some of that is in place, at least some of it, if not all. So if you could speak to that.
That's correct. Betty Bogg, CEO of Connections for the Homeless. I'm joined tonight by our Chief Program Officer, Tina White. Tina, do you want to come up here with me? So Tina has more on-the-ground details.
Sure.
But Councilmember Harris, what you're saying resonates deeply with me. We can provide you with research about abstinence-only programs and how they are not effective in curbing addictive behaviors. We can provide you with that separately. But you're right, we can't just have addictive behaviors go unaddressed or unhelped. And so we have on our staff currently, and we're not talking about the future, this is all right now, we have a on-site nursing staff, licensed nursing staff, and a registered nurse who is also deployable into the facility. They help have conversations with people who are experiencing addiction issues on a regular basis. We also have 2 full-time licensed mental health professionals, one of whom is on-site at the Margarita full-time. She offers behavioral therapy, mental health therapy directly now. We have multiple staff who are working on housing plans with each resident. That is a mandatory function that the residents have to comply with, is working on a housing plan so that there's not a permanency to their residency at the Margarita Inn. The thing that impacts us most in our ability to find housing for people is the lack of housing. And so it can draw on for quite a bit for people who especially have a lot of barriers to getting housed. We do not allow, if it's illicit on the street, it's illicit inside the Margarita Inn. We, just to be clear, Councilmember Ravel, we are not allowing smoking throughout the building. We're complying with all the indoor smoking, all those smoking ordinances throughout the city. We do not allow alcohol consumption in any public area. It's only within the privacy of people's rooms. And we offer all kinds of substance use, recovery, adjunct therapies for people who are ready to take advantage of them. Tina, you can talk maybe some more about the kinds of additional sort of supports that we have.
Sure. So we do have wraparound services currently. So we have behavioral health and medical staff and case managers and the management team working together to coordinate care. So that is already in place. I want to speak a little bit about, so we actually have very robust services for an emergency shelter program. Much more, we actually have more services than Housing Forward's program does. We have more staff. We have credentialed staff. We have licensed clinical social workers, as well as nurses and other licensed staff. I want to speak a little bit about the alcohol policy, and I really appreciate Council Member Burns' point about evidence-based practices, which we do utilize. So we make decisions based on evidence. What are the best practices of our funders? And what are just the existing best practices for working with this population? One is harm reduction, and another is housing first. It is very likely that an unintended consequence of banning alcohol will result in people using alcohol outside of the Margarita, which no one wants, including us. A couple of other points about that. It makes it harder to engage someone in substance use. If they have a dependence or abuse issue, they're not going to talk about it. They're not going to bring it to their case manager because they're afraid they're going to lose their housing. So they're just going to be quiet, and they're either going to self-select to exit or they'll be discharged. I also want to talk a little bit about what Housing First is. It focuses on behaviors. There's many people who use alcohol, and it doesn't result in an adverse behavioral issue. I'm sure there's people in this room that use alcohol, and it doesn't result in an issue. We certainly have people with addiction issues, probably close to half our residents, and that's because it correlates very highly with homelessness. But there's people who don't use alcohol. So many of our participants use alcohol, and it doesn't result in belligerent behavior or violent behavior. We already have a policy in place to deal with that. So if someone behaves in a way that's unsafe for the community, they can't stay there. They won't be able to stay there. There's people who don't use alcohol and do behave violently. And so we focus on that behavior. It's the behavior that is the issue. And I just want to emphasize, we share the goal of safety on-site and in the Fourth Ward. We share that for everybody who lives in the Fourth Ward, for Margarita participants that live in the Fourth Ward, and for our staff. So we're on the same page with safety, but safety results from using evidence-based practices.
There was another piece that talked about not being able to ensure compliance by connections, and Councilmember Newsom, maybe this, or Council Cummings, he's not here though, can help with this. I mean, what is the enforcement mechanism? Enforcement mechanism, my understanding with the license, they would, if they did not adhere to the agreement, that the license could be revoked or suspended. So could you explain kind of the enforcement mechanism around this license, Council Cummings?
Good evening.
In the way it's written currently, I know it's subject to change, but as it's written today.
Sure. Good evening, members of the Human Services Committee, Chair Burns, Nicholas Cummings, Corporation Counsel. The enforcement mechanism will be enforced the Health and Human Services Department through inspections, as we do with other facilities that are regulated by the city's health code. So if there are violations, there's options for fine or revocation. The way that it's written now, there's lots of options for lack of renewal or revocation of the license. So that's how the license would be enforced. In terms of any sort of violation that was determined, we'd actually have to be subject to an inspection by city staff.
And to play it out to its dramatic end, if their license was revoked and they refused and they continued to operate, what would be the course of action the city could take?
Well, so without having to put all the cards on the table, we'd likely have to go to court to get a judge.
That's what I want to do, yeah.
Yeah, we'd have to get a judge to tell them to cease operations. It'd be some sort of writ.
Okay, hopefully that captured the concern for one of our public commenters about enforcement. And I don't know if we have anybody here from Property Standards, because that's a different question in terms of there's a fair point made that the city has had difficulty doing routine inspections currently. How do they plan to keep up with inspecting the Margarita Inn? So I don't know if anybody is online or available from Property Standards. If not, I can move on to another question, but that is a question that I have. Can you Connections talk a little bit about length of stay? That's something that has come up a lot, and I see also ratio has come up. Like, what is the average length of stay, or any other information you can provide us on to understand length of stay and how you treat it and how you think about it, and
Sure.
and what the outcomes are?
Sure. Length of stay currently is dropping. It has dropped from, sorry, I think it's on, because I'm tall. Better? Okay. Length of stay had been around 10 months, and as at any given time, there's a certain demographic snapshot that you can take of folks at the Margarita, and some of them will be easier to house and others will be harder to house. So it has dropped from 10 months-ish down to 8.5 in the last calendar year, I believe. We are, as I said, one of the fundamental mandatory expectations of a person who is at the Margarita is that they are actively working on their housing plan. Depending on what that person's barrier to housing is, perhaps they have a severe mental illness, perhaps they have a criminal background, perhaps they have an eviction on their record, that can take, the avenue of housing options can differ based on their income, based on their disability, based on the length of time they've been homeless. So there's these different sort of lanes that people go into based on their demographics. And it can just take a long time to find housing that's going to work for them. What you can't do, and people do, especially if they've been homeless for a very long time, they come to the Margarita and they feel safe for the first time in a long time, and they may not want to get ready and start working on a housing solution right away, but they have to. And one of the ways that you would be discharged from the Margarita is that you are not engaging with us on that. And of course, we're going to try really hard. We're very good at getting people to engage with us in this discussion, but some people will not do it, and then this is not the place that they can stay. So there's not a predetermined length of stay to move people out. We have to have individualized discussions with folks. I'm not sure, I don't have at the tip of my fingers the longest time anyone has stayed at the Margarita. I can tell you that one of the longest was a woman who came, I believe, on the first day we opened the Margarita. And I tell this story a lot. She'd been on chemotherapy. She was sleeping on the trains. And it took us 2 years to get her a correct housing solution. So she didn't have behavioral issues. If we'd put her on the street, it would have been back to the trains and trying to do chemotherapy. So it just took us a long time because there's just a very severe lack of housing that is willing to accept folks.
Are there any metric-driven, grant-stipulated requirements that would incentivize connections to keep someone for a long period of time, the same person for a long period of time? And then the other end of that is there anything that would benefit you actually serving new participants that's grant-stipulated?
Our grants, the current way we are funded, does not incentivize or de-incentivize us to churn through a certain number of people or have them stay longer. What we want to report to our funders is how successful we are at getting people housed. And so it's less based on the length of time than it is on the ultimate result.
Okay. And I thought that was important. I mean, obviously, people may think there are other motivations driving it, but I like to look at incentives when possible. So that's why I asked that question. Hopefully that's helpful to some. Going back to the real estate taxes, was that talking about property taxes? And this is a question, I guess, to my colleagues, or the real estate transfer tax? Was property taxes being referred to? Is that everyone's understanding? That as a nonprofit, they would be exempt from paying property taxes. Okay. I'm sorry. And exempt from hotel taxes as well? Director Ogbo, is that true?
I'll have to refer that to the staff or department who can answer that question. I'm uncertain of that.
Okay.
I can answer that we
Please,
have
yeah.
paid hotel taxes until very recently. We paid them to the Hilton Garden Inn, we paid them to the Orrington, we paid them to the Margarita. My understanding is, sorry, I'm not in the mic. My understanding is the owner has not passed those on to the city, but we have receipts. We pay those.
And I guess as part of any agreement, do you intend to continue to pay the hotel tax?
So we
Or I guess it
learned,
wouldn't apply at that point,
right.
would be the issue. Yeah.
And we learned that, and again, not a lawyer here, after 30 days, any hotel tax is no longer gets collected by the operator. But we're not hotel operators.
I was going to say, the bigger thing is that it wouldn't apply
It would not
at that point, right? And then I think property taxes, and correct me if I'm wrong, Council Cummings, but again, there are many nonprofits that are afforded property tax exemption. Obviously, we want to keep that to a minimal, but that is the standard as far as I understand. I'm going to kick it to Councilmember Reed, unless you had something to respond to.
I did.
Council Cummings, please.
Just very briefly, you're correct that as a nonprofit, the building being owned by a nonprofit, they would likely be exempt from any property taxes. But I am unaware of any exemption for our home rule hotel tax, which the way it's written does apply to rooming houses as well. So I don't know if, for example, other entities like the YMCA, for example, pays the hotel tax. I would have to talk to finance and the collector's office. But insofar as I know that there's not an exemption for the home rule tax of the hotel tax.
That is good information to continue to explore. Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think, to my knowledge, that if, and maybe Connections might know better, that if a nonprofit is operating like if you had actual housing, you certainly would be paying property taxes on if you're providing units for a rental.
We have 2 small properties in Skokie that were conveyed to us by the Neighborhood Stabilization Program back in 2009. Those are tax exempt. That's the only property that we own.
And you rent those, or do you have like an annual lease with
We provide
folks?
services in them. We do not charge for any of our services. So we're putting people in those units,
Okay.
but we're not getting rent from them.
Okay, and maybe that's the exemption when you're not getting rent. I appreciate what I've heard today. I think we have really good direction moving forward on this. I'm really looking forward to seeing more research on the efficacy of banning alcohol or not. And I think we should look at other. I think the conversation, I'm sure Councilmember Newsom will continue the conversation with the community to, really get to the heart of what are the concerns and how can we best address those concerns, which I think we're all on the same page with that.
I have other questions.
Oh, yeah, I'm not. Yeah. That's just,
No, this was the time afforded to. In fact, I very carefully worked with Director Obo to make sure that everything after this should go pretty quickly, just so all my colleagues up here know, so we can set aside enough time for this, because this is the time afforded to discuss it. Economic impact agreement. Councilmember Newsom, I don't know if that's something that has been a part of is that the fourth pillar? So we can talk about that more offline, but I just wanted to bring it up. Council Cummings, we keep losing him. Council Cummings, if you can hear me, I have one question. There he is. So this is about I think it's called the Homeless Bill of Rights, but I know you had an opinion that may differ from Connections. I think this is, it was shared with me. I read it. It's a short little section that I'm unclear on what it means, and I don't know if it's worth getting an additional opinion on it, because it's such a short section that really doesn't explain itself well. But if you want to share your thoughts on that.
Is there a particular section of the rights? I know that we've had discussions with Connections and their counsel concerning the ability to share information with law enforcement, and trying to figure out a way to make that happen. One of the public commenters did mention keeping a list of people who are present there. That's up for Connections. I think if they want to keep that for their own reasons, I think they're well within their rights concerning this particular statute to keep such a list. But the issue comes whether they need to share that list or what they can share with law enforcement. And we've had those discussions to try and figure out a way to make that work, where they can share information with our police department, and while we're not running afoul of the Bill of Rights.
And that's something that we can address down the road. Again, I think because there's a difference of legal interpretation, and I'll just address you, Councilman Newsom. I don't know if that's something where we want to get another opinion on that. That might be helpful if that becomes a kind of a sticking issue.
I'm assuming it's section 10(6).
Yeah, exactly, section 6. Yeah.
So the disclosure of information without proper legal authority, typically what folks want is either a subpoena or a warrant. And in the course of an investigation by the police department, it might not even be that serious where you need a warrant. Sometimes the police are just looking for certain information because they're trying to find a person of interest, etc. But there are some real concerns because people who might be residents of the Margarita Inn might be trying to escape domestic violence situations or some other sensitive matters that would put them in real danger. So, in addition, we are a public entity regulated by sunshine laws of the state. So the city being in possession with that information then no longer makes it a little less private. So there are some real concerns, but I think it's in everyone's best interest that we figure out a way to allow Connections to work with Evanston Police.
Yeah, because I think, and one, I think there has been examples of connections working with the Evanston Police Department. I think really what we're talking about here is, and this is what I'm still unclear on, is does that section prohibit them from confirming whether or not someone has taken residency, if that's the legal term of participants there, or not. And I did not immediately think that after reading it. I think Connections feels that way, and so that's why I would love to get, because there's in the section it says like clearly that you don't want to provide, you can't provide any information that the participant has provided to Connections, but is the residency itself, is taking residency itself any information that they've provided to Connections, or is that just they live there? So there's some legal interpretation questions that are outstanding for me personally, and again, I don't know how, if that becomes a sticking issue, we just have to figure out how to settle it.
From the city's perspective, no, it is not like whether someone is residing there or not is not part of that information or records or information. But we have a differing opinion with counsel for Connections. So we're trying to work with, to try and figure out a resolution to be able to aid our police department in their investigations in acquiring certain information that we can actually agree on.
And I think what makes it difficult is, and Betty and I were talking about this too, is that I think typically a law enforcement officer can go up to a single-family house apartment and they can clearly determine for themselves by just what's on the mailbox or what's on the buzzer who lives there, and they don't necessarily need to be on there, but they have a direct connection to them. They could ring the doorbell, they can knock on the door, somebody comes to the door, hey, we'd like to talk to such and such, and they either say, hey, get a warrant, or will you allow us in? And they either say, yeah, you can come in, or I'm willing to talk to you, or they don't, and they say, go get a warrant. I think what makes this different is there's like this middle person that's there when the police officer comes in. There's no names on the doors, so you can't determine without knocking on every door. You just don't know where someone lives, basically, and you wouldn't find that out until you knock on every door, or unless Connections willing to share that information. So I think it's an important legal interpretation to clarify for sure. Again, if this becomes a sticking point, Councilor Reed, I saw a flash. I keep seeing flashes. Okay, please, yeah.
What I was just going to say that we're happy to continue in dialogue about this. We obviously are concerned about our own liability. We're concerned about the privacy of the community, of the residents, and for the safety of the community. As Tanya said, we have the same goal in mind, and it's kind of a matter of how we do it. Just so you're clear, we do keep a list of people that are in the facility, because obviously we have to know who's in our own facility. And we have agreed to an inspection of those records by the city. What happens normally with city funding, where we are funded with pass-through money for the TBRA program, for CDBG, we get pass-through money, and the city is able to come out and inspect those records on site as part of a monitoring visit. So clearly, if the city's funding anything, they can come out and inspect our records, but they are not taken off-site at any time.
Yeah. Councilman Reed.
Yeah. I think we all want to make sure we're protecting the privacy of folks, but this makes me think of, other business records. There have been measures that I've supported in the past and will continue to support that would require businesses to turn over records as to the rate of their employees' compensation, so some enforcement body could ensure that, if we had a minimum wage ordinance, that the business was paying the proper minimum wage. If we had a fair work week ordinance, to make sure that schedules. And so there certainly are laws that require, business entities, private entities, to maintain certain records. And so I just wonder if this was a condition of the license that such a record was maintained, I think that would kind of answer some of the concerns that folks have legally. I think if it's a condition of the license and it's just required by our local ordinance, that the city has the power to inspect those kinds of, routine business records, I think that sounds like a reasonable requirement and record that would be maintained.
Council comments. I don't know if you want to share any thoughts, or I can continue.
You can continue.
Okay.
I just, I'm writing it down
Okay.
as a suggestion to the license.
Ban on weapons, articulated ban on weapons, I think is what I heard.
Yeah, we have a ban on weapons.
Okay, that's easy enough. This may sound silly, but somebody brought it up, so I want to work down the list, and we're almost done here. But bunk beds came up.
Nope, we've never had bunk beds. Well,
And I guess I want to understand why that matters, which I'm sure it does. I don't know enough.
You have city requirements codes, and the codes stipulate how many people you can have in an open environment, and the city inspector found them on the first floor.
Okay.
That's what we
And in council comments, I don't know if you can speak to this, just because I don't. We typically don't take comments from the audience, which is fine, but I just don't want to set the precedent.
there were beds, multiple beds in a room. There were never bunk beds. We worked with the city building
If you could step up a little
inspectors.
bit to the mic, please.
Sorry,
It's
yeah.
just for the people watching on YouTube.
Sure. We were informed by the city inspectors that we could not use that as a sleeping room, and so we've ceased using it as a sleeping room.
Okay.
But not bunk beds. There had been at Hilda's place years ago, but bunk beds are not safe.
And then I don't know if Chief Eddington is still with us. Is Chief Eddington? I had a question for him if he's still with us. He might have left. He just talked about enforcing that Connections has struggled with enforcing rules and maintaining order in the downtown facility or in the facility. And I wonder if Chief Eddington or anyone else from our police department has ever shared suggestions on how you may go about improving that.
Yeah, I just want to note, because he's appeared here as private citizen Eddington, and it just so it doesn't seem like this is a statement from our police department.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yes. Richard Eddington, who's our former police chief and interim police chief.
Sure. Former Chief Eddington.
And if, I'm sorry, I didn't know if Chief Stewart was available to online or in person to also speak to it.
What's here? Here's Commander Glue.
Okay.
I think he's ducking away. I can say
And
that.
just to set this up, just in case you're listening, because I think at this point, I would hope we would have some clear recommendations from our police department as to what Connections could do to improve on some of the things that Richard Eddington outlined. So you can, Betty, speak to it, and then if any of our law enforcement wants to share some of those recommendations, I think that would be helpful for the body to hear.
Yeah, I've personally walked Chief Eddington through the building, and we have frequent conversations with police officers and police command regarding how we are enforcing rules, not enforcing rules, anything like that. We're always open to suggestions. I'm not aware of any specifics that have been brought to us that we've not acted on. We have shared the number of people that are discharged for behavioral reasons, so we do enforce our own rules. But if there's something we're missing, we're happy to talk to them about it.
And I guess the request, and I can also, Director Ogbo, if you can share it, and I can also share it, but is that if there are recommendations from our police department about this proposal, if we can get that in writing and ready for review at our next meeting, that would be helpful, so that there's no confusion as to what our police department is recommending and hoping that Connections does in order to forward this. So that's all I have. Thank you for everyone's patience. I'll open it back one more time for any last comments or questions, and then we will close this out and move on to the next item. And
I'm
somebody
sorry, was
please make a
yeah, I was
motion
gonna-
to.
That's what I was
yeah,
going to do.
There you go.
If I'm recognized. I move to table this to our next
Second.
meeting.
It's been probably moved and seconded. I'm assuming there's no discussion. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of tabling this to, what was it again?
Our next meeting.
Just our next meeting, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, the ayes have it. All right, thank you for everybody for coming to make public comment and to participate in this important issue. You want to move the next one?
Yep, I'll move ordinance 87022, adding subsection 9142, Miranda warnings to be issued.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Reed, seconded by Councilmember Ravel. Any discussion, or can we just
I'll just
vote?
Yeah, I'll just very quickly, the purpose of this is that the Supreme Court has recently, this wonderful Supreme Court has recently issued a decision that begins to rip away at the guarantees of folks' Miranda rights, and I think it makes sense for us here in Evanston to ensure that locally we are guaranteeing that right, that folks know what their rights are when they're interacting with law enforcement. And so this is a small update that will just require that officers let people know what their rights are.
Councilmember Ravel.
Just a quick question. So is there a state law on this requiring?
I believe there's something adjacent. I do not recall. I don't know if Council Cummings has an answer to that.
Commander Glue, I don't know if this is something you want to speak to. Thank you, sir.
I'm not, I'll just also say that I'm not questioning whether officers are given the Miranda rights. Yeah.
No, I understand. Chairman Burns, other members of the committee. Sorry, I just would step up and just say I can't not 100% etched in stone. I think, but it's a constitutionally guaranteed right that you have your Miranda rights read to you before you are interrogated and you are in custody. It is also, there's a court decision establishing that. It's also required in policy. Failure to read Miranda rights when applicable is also a policy violation of our Lexipol policy. I could speak to that. Probably anything outside the scope of that I would have to research. So I hope that's helpful.
And I just, Commander Glue is 100% right. Miranda rights were recognized, affirmed, whatever you want to say, and I think it was 1966, with the Miranda versus Arizona case. But as, again, we very clearly are seeing with this case in Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court is certainly ready to roll back 50-plus years of precedent. And so that's what has happened, has started to happen with a 2021 Supreme Court case, and I just want to make sure that here locally we are ensuring that these rights are still there for folks.
All right, thank you, Commander.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving this and moving it forward, say aye. Any nays? No nays. Okay, the ayes have it unanimously. Moving on. Can someone move?
I'll move ordinance 115-022, amending portions of Title 8, Chapter 6, Food Service and Retail, Food Store, Sanitation of the Evanston City Code.
Second.
All right, it's been probably moved by Councilmember Reed, seconded by Councilmember Harris. Starting us off with discussion, Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, I support this. I have two things. One, first, procedural. Has this gone through referrals?
No, this is a recommendation through staff members.
Okay. I'll say that since it's an ordinance change, it would be required to go through referrals. I am supportive of what is proposed here.
Can you make a motion like we discussed in our powwow?
Yeah. Well, I'm just. I mean,
you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll make a motion. Okay, and then my second thing is, so that's one. I think it needs to go through referrals, and then two, I'd love to, as it's making its way through the process, and hopefully we can get this. I don't know when referrals meets next. Thursday. I'd even be comfortable passing this now and then,
Can we suspend the rules? Is that what would be in order?
we could
I
suspend
just
the
want to do
rules.
it correctly.
But here's my concern, actual policy concern. So I see that it updates a number of license fees, and so it seems like it's just keeping up with inflation is what I assumed. But there were two places where it didn't include the price, and so that was for the peddler's license. It didn't say anything. It just said link. And so I'd want to make sure that those are right. Currently, it's $50 by code. I'd be fine. I'd really like to keep it there. But if there is some compelling reason to move it up to 100, which would match us with Chicago, I don't think we have the same market as Chicago, and so it may not. It may be a bit prohibitive, but certainly would want to look at that. And then there are a couple of other fees that I'd like to look at, to see if we can keep some of them low to continue to create, entrepreneurship opportunities for folks that are low cost and low barrier to entry.
Good day, members of the Human Services Committee. Ike Ogbo, Director, Health and Human Services Department. To your point, Council Member Reed, which license fees would you be referring to that you want to lower or you want to include in this ordinance? I think we've covered most of the licenses, if not all.
Yeah. The only, as I said, the only one that I didn't see was the peddler's license, and I'd want to keep that at the $50 mark, unless bumping it up $25 would create some revenue to allow for some alternate inspection or something. And then while it was a very modest increase, I was looking at the farmers market cost, and I'd like to keep that roughly the same as well, or keep it at an even 100. I think about the West End farmers market and some of the others. I don't know if we need to add additional cost.
Well, the farmers market is actually reduced in what's proposed in the ordinance, and that's in line with the state code. So the state code determines what the farmers markets pay. So if you look at the ordinance, you see that there are two license fees for those who are just primarily selling eggs and for any other operation. So that's to align with what the state code has provided.
Okay, I would just want to then look at that, because this is a local fee. It's collected by us, and the money stays here with the city, correct?
Well, it can be a local fee, but according to the state law, in order for us to make any increases in regards to the farmers market or even make any changes, there has to be some public hearings with the farmers market individuals, which can be a complicated process. So my recommendation is for us to be in line with what the state has recommended at this point, which is, I believe, $175 for all operations for food at the farmers market, and $75 for those who are only selling eggs.
And before we continue discussion around this issue, depending on, I think, what Council Cummings says, we may be, holding or referring this, or actually maybe not if you suspend the rules. But let me see what Council Cummings says first. Quickly.
I was just going to mention that suspension of the rules is not necessarily a committee. However, this ordinance as proposed is an administrative change, unless the feeling is that it's actually a change in policy of the city. Really, it's a revision of an existing city code, an update of the city code for us to administratively enforce the licensing structure. So I don't really believe it would be proper for referrals, but obviously that's up to
Does it
you
need
guys.
our approval or no?
To go to referral or go to
No, for
city council?
for it to be put into effect.
So the city council rules only requires items that are going to change in policy to go through referrals. This is an administrative change in city code, so it just has to be approved by the Human Services Committee to go to city council.
That's what I mean, yeah.
And then be approved by the council.
Which feels like a policy.
Yeah, I'd definitely say it's a policy. If I put forward a proposal to, change the cost of the wheel tax or change the cost of demolition fee, you could say that, just changing prices is administrative, but it's a policy in effect. And there's more than just changing prices. I mean, there are some kind of routine updates to language here, but it's not just changing the cost of licenses. There are some additional words added. So I think it's more than, it's a policy.
And then real quick, you mentioned suspension of the rules what'd you say about the Human Services Committee? That
You don't need to suspend the rules at committee, but if you wanted to, the suspension of the rules only applies to city council.
Okay, so we could, forward it to council and suspend the rules there? Or?
Well, my understanding of the council rule is that the council rule says that no policy change that hasn't gone through the referrals committee may appear on any council or standing committee agenda, was my understanding.
That's correct.
Right. So
Council Member Ravel was next up, and then we'll get to.
Well, I guess I view this as our updating our local code to match the state update of its code, and I see this, I agree with the Corporation Council that it's a pretty administrative effort here, and I don't really see this rising to the level of being considered a policy change.
I'm happy to move forward with that.
I'm not. I think just very simply, when we talked about this, the fact that it requires us to approve it, to me, suggests that it is a policy change. Administrative, to me, is something that would not require us at all, really. They could do it on their own. And so I think keeping true to how we've interpreted in other cases, we should either suspend the rules or, refer this to the referrals committee. Councilmember Harris, I'm sorry.
yes, I
then
move
you're
that
next.
we move, now I've lost it, ordinance 11022 to move to referrals.
All right, is there a second? I guess I'll second it.
You don't
We'll do a roll call on this. Unless there's, is there any discussion? Hearing none. Councilmember Hedikotis.
I was just curious, Director Ogbo, is this time sensitive at all? Would there be any?
Well, it's time sensitive. This is the period in which we send out notices to our food establishments. One of the recommendations in this ordinance is for us to remove a consumer price index that can potentially increase fees for our food establishments. I took the liberty to review other ordinances where fees are charged in the city and other municipalities, and I didn't find a consumer price index in their ordinance. So if we delay this a bit, it would increase the fees that we'll be sending in an invoice format to our restaurants. And if we look across the consumer index pricing, it pretty much increases by 1.1 or 1.5% each year. So if we wait for a long time to approve this, it would definitely hinder the way in which we send invoices to our food establishment owners. We might have to charge them the 2023, whatever the consumer index pricing is at that point. So.
And I mean, if Councilmember Harris wants to reconsider it or wherever that's called, real quick, although I think you said the council comments and rules don't apply to us, that doesn't mean we can't suspend the rules here. It just means we don't have to, but we can. So we also can suspend the rules, but I'm saying we should just be consistent. The fact that this is an ordinance, not a resolution, that is coming to us for approval.
And so,
in the way we've interpreted this in other situations makes this a policy change, but we can suspend the rules.
and I, just for clarity for staff, is it the direction of the committee that any time we need to change a city ordinance, even if it is for administrative purposes, because the fact that it's actually a change to the city code and the city council is a legislative body, that those changes need to go through referrals committee?
Correct, and some people think that even parking changes, shouldn't, but it is a code change.
Correct.
And we're going to discuss this at an upcoming rules committee meeting, so we can address this and decide to put some clear language as to how we're going to, what we're going to determine is a policy change and where there are exemptions, but right now there's not enough guidance to, there's not enough guidance. And so I think we should either suspend the rules, which I'm totally fine with supporting. Councilmember Harris.
I'll remove my motion to send to referral, and that we should vote based upon time constraints.
Well, one sec, Councilmember Hadikotis, will you finish? I'm sorry, I kind of moved on from. Okay, Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to suspend the rules, which I do think is appropriate here at this committee. I'll also say, I mean, even what your explanation to Councilmember Hadikotis even reinforced that it is a policy change by changing the CPI, and that's policy. It's not just administrative, certainly. So, yeah.
Want to make the motion?
I'll make the motion. I move that we suspend the rules in relation to the referrals committee.
All right, second. It's been properly moved and seconded. Any further
and then
discussion?
I'm sorry. I just want to be clear, Director Ogbo. So for the peddler's license, it's not included here. It doesn't say anything. So is that staying at $50? Is that?
That's correct.
So I'd like to motion that we amend this to include that just to make it crystal clear that the peddler's license will be $50.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, I made two motions at once. I think Council Cummings.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
clear it
guide
up,
me
and
through this.
I'm going to go first for the suspension of the rules.
Okay, we're going to move that one for. Okay, so that one's already been properly moved and seconded. Any other discussion?
I'll vote, yeah.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? All right, then ayes have it. And then you want to make another motion?
I would like to just amend the language to, it says link now. I just want to be clear that the two peddlers licenses would be $50.
Second.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All right, the ayes have it. Okay.
Now you have to vote on the motion.
And now we need to vote on the ordinance
ordinance
itself.
As amended.
As amended, but that's already been done, so we can call the question, right?
Yeah.
The amendment's passed, you just need to call the question on the
Okay.
motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, any nays? The ayes have it. Okay. Where are we at now? HS4.
I will move
Can you
item
move it?
HS5, ordinance 118-022, amending portions of Title IX, Chapter 5, Section 11.
All right, it's been properly moved. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, it's been properly moved by Councilman Reed, seconded by Councilman Hadikotis. Councilman Reed.
Yeah, I just want to quickly set this up. I know that Councilmember Harris is new to this committee. This is your first meeting. So what's in the packet reflects conversations that we've had on this dais. It reflects what the Equity and Empowerment Commission discussed, and I think thoughtfully discussed. Even one of our former colleagues, Jane Grover, is on that commission and was in support of this. And what this does is it makes minor, almost administrative tweaks, if you will, to our public nudity ordinance. It reduces our legal liability. We've discussed it a lot here before. There are communities such as Fort Collins, Colorado, who have an ordinance that reflects our current ordinance and have been sued, and their taxpayers have been on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Chicago recently had a suit that was similar to this that they lost in the last few years. In 2020, that was similar, and in fact, it was brought by a former Northwestern student who was a part of the trans community, and that person was given a settlement for their a version of their public nudity ordinance. And so this brings us in line with our neighbors to the north: Wilmette, Winnetka, Kenilworth, Skokie, Lake Forest. It brings us in alignment with the ordinances, similar to the ordinances that they have, and it does that in a gender-neutral fashion, which helps us affirm the existence of our trans community and creates equity between the genders.
All right, any Councilmember Ravel?
Of course. Well, So I have a problem with the proposed definition of indecent behavior that's in this proposed amendment. So in places where going topless is broadly accepted, the French Riviera, for example, those who go topless are not doing so with the intent to arouse or satisfy their sexual desire. So basing our definition of indecent exposure on the concept of lewd intent ignores other types of behavior that are likely to result in the discomfort of others. So I would modify our nudity ordinance in a way that basically, it would modify our nudity ordinance in a way that basically would say yes to going topless. But residents have not contacted me clamoring for topless beaches. In fact, just the opposite. So I do understand that we need to amend the ordinance to remove the reference to the female body. But our ordinance should continue to reflect the views of our community and have a broader definition of indecent exposure. So I would like us to use the language they use in Kenilworth and define indecent exposure as, defining it as not properly and decently clothed. So I guess that's my amendment.
Are you making a motion?
I move to amend the proposed amendment to, this would be B. So it would say indecent exposure shall be defined as A, an act of sexual penetration or other sexual conduct. I could live without that one too, but anyway, or indecent shall be defined as not properly or decently clothed.
Council comments, do you have that? Okay. Is there a second?
I will second it.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion around it? I don't know, Councilmember Hadcotis, if you had comments on that or because you had your light on before the amendment.
I think I like that amendment because I also agree with the lewd and indecent behavior being way too subjective. I would like to get more information about how this does impact potentially our Parks and Rec staff at the beaches. I do like the amendment a lot, and I feel like we have to make these changes, but I would like to table it, make the changes, and get more input from staff. And also, I think there are I've also received a lot of, questions from residents, and I think more outreach would be good to, inform people about what's going on.
Councilman Reed?
Yeah, I agree. I support Councilmember Revell's changes, her amendment there. I don't think we need to table this. Again, our ordinance, particularly, with Alderman Revell's, with Councilmember Revell's amendments, it's mirroring our neighbors, and our neighbors do not have. I think we can have those conversations between now and this will have it's an ordinance change, so it'll have 2 readings at council, so it'll be, a month before this is passed fully. And so we'll have time for discussion, time to get check in with Kenilworth and other communities, how this impacts their staff. But I think understanding, the need to change this, again, that this has been tried and true amongst many North Shore beachfront communities in our area without issue. I think we can, and this is, had several readings here at this committee, several readings at, it went to the Parks and Rec Board.
I was going to say, I think you have the support, but I want to get to Councilmember Harris just in case she has any questions, and then we can call the question.
Sure.
Councilmember Harris.
I think if you're saying that we have the opportunity, again, enforcement is appropriate to understand how we have staff move forward and enforce a new regulation like of this sort. So if you're saying we have time to do that, then I think we can move forward.
All right, seeing no other lights for discussion, all those in favor of this?
First on Councilmember Revell's amendment.
That's what I'm going on.
Okay.
Yeah. All those in favor of Councilmember Revell's amendment indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All right, that has unanimous support. And then
The ayes have it.
the ayes have it, and then the underlying or the ordinance. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, the ayes have it. HS 5. Okay, and so so now we're going for items for communication, review of Evanston Police Complaints and Comments Report. I asked Director Ogbo if he could send this out well in advance of the meeting because I knew we would be short for time, so hopefully everyone has had an opportunity to read through it. And if there aren't any questions for Commander Glue, we were going to vote on it and move forward. But of course, if there are any questions, or if you would like him to present anything in particular, we can do that as well. A little bit behind schedule, which is why I shared it in advance of the meeting.
I'm happy to move forward and vote on it.
I would say,
please,
Committee Chairman Burns, there's one thing I probably would take this opportunity to communicate that was brought up during public comment, and that was the point of our officers that live in town to be properly or to use a management prerogative to assign our officers to geographic areas that are not going to, I would say, facilitate that complaint. That would have that, and that, like I said, would create that environment for that complaint, whether it's an officer that lives in town is having a neighbor dispute, or even just something where somebody is having some conflict that appears to be difficult to mitigate or de-escalate, that we would use our prerogative as managers to geographically assign that officer away from the problem. At our last CPRC meeting, I did draft a memo. It was approved by CPRC. We moved to the chief for approval, and that is that in the future, when these issues come up, in an effort to de-escalate, we'll use our management, what's within our management powers to avoid those situations in the future.
Okay, thank you. And we don't need to vote on this, right? It's just an accept to place or file?
Yeah, to accept and place on file, we vote. If that's
Needs a vote? Doesn't need a vote, right? Okay. So,
accept it and place it on file.
Do we need a vote?
Yes.
Okay, so all those in favor of
Aye.
accepting and placing this, well, was this, did we motion this? I don't think we motioned this. So can I get a motion for this, please?
Yeah, I'll move item HS1, review of Evanston Police Complaints and Comments Report.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The ayes have it. All right, we will start. Seeing no other matters before this committee, I will call it adjourned, and we will